My name is Cecilia Sorenson. I'm the director of the Global Consortium on Climate and Health Education at Columbia University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this Climate and Health Rapid Response. As you know, this past summer was a tragic and devastating time for many countries and communities in the Mediterranean who experienced record-breaking heat waves and one of the most severe wildfire years in history. And although individual fires are difficult to attribute to climate change, heat waves and droughts, which we know are becoming more likely and more intense in this era of climate change, certainly we know played a role. Now, the health impacts of these events we know are widespread and they preferentially impact some of the most vulnerable populations, yet we are rarely able to truly quantify these health effects, and thus they are very difficult to address. So today we've brought together a panel of incredible health experts from the region to really explore the health story behind the interconnected climate events of this past summer, and to discuss how to heal from these events and how to prepare health systems on many fronts for the complex environmental future that lies ahead for the region. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Dr. Ümit Sahin is a senior scholar and the coordinator of climate change studies at the Istanbul Policy Center at Sabancı University. Since the early 1990s, Dr. Sahin has been part of the Green political movement and an active contributor to the anti-nuclear and human rights movements. He is one of the founders of the Association of the Doctors for the Environment, serving as the organization's president between 2002 and 2006. In 2007, Dr. Sahin coordinated the Turkey Signed Kyoto Protocol campaign, which was carried out by Turkey's Green Party, for whom he was one of the founders and served as a co-spokesperson between 2010 and 2012. Dr. Sahin also recently served as a member of the steering committee of the Istanbul City Council for its 2019 to 2021 period. In addition to these policy and leadership roles, Dr. Sahin has authored and edited several books, policy papers, and articles related to climate change, energy transitions, environmental health, green politics, and human rights. So we're honored to have him join us here today. Our next speaker is Dr. Charalampia Geladari. She is an internist and a PhD candidate at the National University of Athens. Currently, she runs her own private practice and works as a research fellow at the Hypertension and Cardiovascular Disease Prevention Clinic at the Athens Medical Group in Greece. After graduating from Patras Medical School, she moved to the US, where she completed a postdoctoral cardiovascular fellowship at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. In February 2020, she founded the Hellenic Society of Environmental and Climate Medicine, whose mission is to raise awareness of the health effects that climate change poses on humanity so that each of us may take steps to reduce the health burdens now and in the future. We'll also be joined today by Dr. Nadim Farajalla, who is the director of the Climate Change and Environment Program at the American University of Beirut's Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs. His current research interests focus on the impact of climate-related flooding and drought on human settlements, the nexus of water, energy, and food in relationship to climate change, with a focus on adaptation and resilience. And he also researches events related to the recovery of devastated lands due to anthropogenic activities. Prior to coming to the university, he worked in the private sector as a senior scientist on projects which focused on water resources and infrastructure, environmental impact studies and management plans, hydrologic studies, and erosion assessment and mitigation. So it's truly an honor to have all of you here today. So as we get started, a few quick notes. Our goal is to really make these sessions interactive. So each of our panelists will be speaking for about 10 minutes, after which we will have a moderated discussion. So please be sure to put your questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll be sure to get to as many of them as possible. And also please remember to keep your microphones muted. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Sahin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecilia. I think my mic is open right now. Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you for your invitation to this very interesting panel discussion. And I would like to share, as an introduction to this panel, let me find my presentation. Some basic things in the beginning, but very short, and then mostly something about the wildfires and heat waves. Also as a medical doctor and a public health specialist, I'm quite a bit interested in the health effects of heat waves. So together with wildfires, and I think it's a very important part of wildfires or fire weather, let's say. So heat waves have really very important health impacts. So I'm trying to, in this presentation, focus on this. But let me begin a very brief update of climate change today. As you know, this year we saw 420 ppm already, and it is 50% increase already of the pre-industrial levels. So climate change is progressing, unfortunately, very fast, and we already get 1.25 degrees in 2016, and 2020 was also 1.25 degrees warmer than pre-industrial, as you see here. It was another record last year, and this is from the last IPCC report, the sixth assessment report of IPCC, that this warming is unprecedented in more than 2,000 years, and the CO2 levels in the atmosphere is the highest of last 2 million years. So, and this climate change is completely and 100% certainty is due to human activities. But also, as we know, this warming is not completely the same in all over the earth. Our region is one of the more severely warming regions, Mediterranean region. Now the global warming in our region is more than 1.5 degrees already. One very important new information from the last IPCC report was that we started to see the extreme events more than before, as you know. But in the last IPCC report, it was very well described. As you see in this picture, that for the 10-year event, so like the events for occurring once in 10 years normally, now in the 1 degree warming, it is now 2.8 times more, and in 1.5 degrees of warming, it will be almost every 2 years. So a 10-year event will be 2-year event for the heat waves or the hot temperature extremes. For the 50-year event, it is even more striking, because normally an event that occurred once in 50 years now is occurring in every 10 years, and it is going to be in the 1.5 degrees, it is going to be occurring in every 5 years. So this means that, especially for the health effects of heat waves and wildfires, the situation is getting worse. This is the same for heavy precipitation and drought. In our region, the most important impacts of climate change, as you know, are decreasing annual precipitation, increasing temperatures, and more forest fires. And only if you look at the last 4 years, we have seen these massive wildfires in Portugal and Spain in 2017, in Greece in 2018, Australian wildfires in 2019-20, record-breaking wildfires in California and North America in 2020, and both in 2019 and 21 this year, Siberian wildfires were really massive and mega fires. This is because of, I think Dr. Nadim will describe this much better than me, but just to give you a very fast hint, that this is due to heat waves. 2003 heat waves, 2006 and 7 drought period. We started to see heat waves almost every year. This is 2019. This is last year, some temperature extremes around Turkey, for example. And this is this summer, last summer, we have seen, especially around our region, around Mediterranean, big heat waves. And last year, July 20th, we have seen the temperature record in Turkey. 49.1 degrees were recorded. And maybe more important than this, we started to see chronic drought periods. you will see here the last 1 year drought, and this is not only less precipitation, but also less humidity and dryness, let's say, soil dryness. As you see in the last year, just look at our region, Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, and Mediterranean. This is last year, this is last 2 years, and this is last 4 years. We have witnessed already a chronic and non-stop drought period in our region. And combination of this drought, and this is another picture of the drought in Turkey in the last 3 months, last 6 months, last year, I guess, this one. So you see that these regions, all year long drought regions, were the places where wildfires happened actually. And these were the massive wildfires last summer in Turkey. And these wildfires were unprecedented in Turkey. It was the first time that we saw more than 100,000 hectares of forests, more than 168 wildfires at the same time in only 2 weeks we have witnessed. So it was massive wildfires happened at the same time. These are some images. Even it threatened one coal-fired power plant, one of the wildfires. It was very scary night actually. So this wildfire were really unseen before in Turkey, but it didn't. It was not the only climate disaster this year. Then last month we also witnessed a massive flooding event in the Black Sea region, and this was also because of extreme heat, because the Black Sea sea surface temperature was very high. It was unusually warm period, and then it caused this massive flooding event. Almost 100 people were killed in this flooding event. So now in my last 3-4 minutes, I will try to summarize the health impacts of heat waves. According to Lancet Commission report, climate change is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century, and the most direct impact of climate change is extreme heat. Also, storms, floods, wildfires can be regarded as direct impacts, but heat waves are, I think, less pronounced, and it should be more talked about. For heat waves, there is no single definition, but it should be specific to an era. It should be relative to the normal, and it can be understood from different definitions. But one of the most easiest definitions is a period of marked unusual hot weather over a region persisting at least 3 days, consecutive days, during the warm period of the year, based on the local climatological conditions. And when we look at the impact of climate change on heat waves, now we have seen that in the Mediterranean region, since the 1960s, the intensity, length, and number of heat waves increased 6 to 7.5 times. So, and Mediterranean region is one of the hotspots of heat wave. And if you look at the summer heat waves over Turkey, it is, we already seen a great increase in the heat waves. And according to projections, until the end of this century, in the moderate scenario, we will probably see at least 42 days more heat waves during the summer period. And 42 days is almost half of summer, as you can understand here. So then it means that heat waves are becoming our normal, unfortunately. But heat waves are increasing mortality. It's deadly event. And we know this from the epidemiological studies. This is a classical 2003 European heat wave. 70,000 people were killed in this heat wave in 2003. But we have known a lot of other very deadly heat waves, like in Chicago heat waves in 1995, or in California, or in India, in Switzerland. We have seen a lot of heat waves like this. And we know that from the literature that, for example, in Europe, every 1 degree increase for the apparent temperature, mortality rate is 2 to 3% higher. I'm going to finish a study that we have done in Sabancı University and Istanbul University with in a group together with our colleagues from Quebec, Public Health Institute of Quebec. So we studied the excess mortality in Istanbul during the extreme heat waves between 2013 and 2017. And according to this study, we have seen that 3 heat waves in 2015, 2016, and 2017. I'm just skipping this, but we already see 419 extreme mortality during only in 14 days in 3 heat waves. So we have to know that some groups are at extreme risk in the heat waves, especially elderly. Also, this was the case in our study. Elderly, patients with especially cardiovascular chronic diseases, children, women, and especially the groups with who are living in improper living conditions. And we have to consider heat wave as a public health issue, and from warning people against the impacts of heat to just highlight the synergistic effect, synergistic relation between air pollution and heat wave, especially ozone pollution and heat wave in the summertime, and especially the deadly effect of very high night heat. So night heat is also very dangerous. Extreme nighttime heat is also very dangerous for health. As a conclusion, so we need to take care of heat wave as a public health problem. National and local policymakers should be aware of the importance of heat waves, and heat waves should be acknowledged as the most direct impacts of climate change. So we need to set city-specific local thresholds for heat waves, and heat warning systems should be established. Of course, personal precautions and warning systems are also important, but we need to remember that the fight against heat waves should be public health problem, which is taken care of by the authorities, health authorities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sahin. It really helps sort of lay the groundwork for us to understand how the Mediterranean region is becoming this climate hotspot, really, with many different compounding climate-related risks to health. So thank you for that. I'll turn it over now to Dr. Geladari.
Yes, thank you. Can you see my screen? Okay, so now we are going to talk about the individual health impacts of the wildfires. We know that climate crisis is here and that it is a threat, a major threat for global health. Climate-associated disease burdens on the national health systems around the world may lead to political or social instability. And it is under no question that climate change constitutes a medical emergency. Here you can see photos from Alepochori, a city in West Attica during the last summer, from Varibobi, northwest of Attica, Vilia, a city in the west of Athens, and Keratea in East Attica, where 240,000 acres of land were burned. From these, a total of about 186,000 acres were forest land, which constitutes 16% of the forests of mainland Attica. Here in the map, you can see with green color the forest land which was burned in Attica this summer, and it is taken from the National Observatory of Athens. The same picture from Evia, an island in Greece above Attica, where 23% of the total island is covered by different types of forests. The fire this summer burned 33% of this area, which corresponds to about 1/3 of the forests in Evia. From the total acres burned, 275,000 were forest land, and the rest, 34,000 acres, were olive groves. Here, a picture from Achaia, ancient Olympia, and Hithio in Mani, 3 different areas in Peloponnesos, where about 300,000 acres of land were burned. Our Prime Minister supports climate change as the culprit for these wildfires, and he calls Mediterranean nations to lead the efforts to respond to climate change. He also underlines that ignoring the cost of extreme weather around the globe would be incalculable for the humanity. He also pledged to close the littering plants by 2028, while recently he created a separate ministry for climate change and civil protection to raise public awareness. So the individual health impacts of the wildfires may be direct and indirect. Of course, we can imagine that in wildfires, human lives are threatened directly. And we know that wildfire smoke can affect us all, mainly through increased air pollution. However, the indirect effects of the wildfires are also important, as they can cause damage to infrastructure and patients can lose access to medical health care and medication. Psychological issues emerge. We can imagine how someone feels after he sees his home, his fortune destroyed in some minutes. And of course, it has been reported that wildfires may be a herald for the emergence of new infections. Here you can see the size comparisons for particulate matter, which can be found in wildfires. The picture is from Environmental Protection Agency in the United States of America. You can see the size of a fine beach sand, about 90 micrometers in diameter, the size of a human hair, which is about 50 to 70 micrometers in diameter, and you can see how small are the sizes of the particulate matter, either 10 micrometers in diameter or 2.5. We know from the literature that the latter can be found in combustion particles, organic compounds, and metals, and it can reach the alveoli, whereas the particulate matter of 10 micrometers in diameter can reach the bronchi. So the wildfire smoke, as we said previously, has a high concentration in fine particulate matter, 2.5 micrometers in diameter, and it can cause headache and increased fatigue among humans. It can irritate the eyes, sinuses, and the throat, causing thus increased coughing. And of course, it can cause difficulty breathing, especially in people with already diagnosed with respiratory disease. It can exacerbate chronic obstructive respiratory disease or asthma. And of course, it can cause chest pain, mainly in people with ischemic heart disease. It is under no question that air pollution is a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Air pollution is increased during wildfires, and it can affect the heart rhythm, the heart rate, the vascular tone, the blood coagulation, and the blood pressure. Here in this picture, we can see the possible biological mechanisms linking particulate matter to heart disease, of course, through systemic oxidative stress and inflammation, causing thus increased thrombogenicity, insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, and thrombosis. Particulate matter can also cause autonomic nervous system imbalance, thereby affecting the heart, mainly heart rate and heart rate variability. And of course, it can enter directly into systemic circulation, causing vasoconstriction, endothelial dysfunction, and platelet aggregation. It has been also showed that exposure to air pollution during a pregnancy has been linked to high blood pressure in children. So we see that pregnant women and children are also very vulnerable to air pollution and wildfires. What we observed this summer in Greece after the wildfires in Attica is an increase in COVID-19 cases, in confirmed COVID-19 cases in the hospitals. And there are data in the literature that support our observation. Even now, we don't have this data reported from Greek hospitals. So these scientists from Harvard University in 2019 showed that mortality rates in 2020 showed that mortality rates for COVID-19 in the United States were 8% higher in states afflicted by high particulate matter of 2.5 micrometers in diameter concentration in the air, with a very high number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 and around 18,000 deaths among population. This number was further increased after the California wildfires in August 2020, which shows that atmosphere was further burdened from the pollutants that were released from this catastrophe. Something similar we observed that happened in Greece this summer. And of course, this was not the case in Maine, which is one of the cleanest states in the United States that adhere to the Clean Air Act and the state law. And here you can see that the confirmed cases of COVID-19 are far more or less, and the deaths as well. European scientists supported the double hit, proposed the double hit hypothesis for this connection. They support that chronic exposure to particulate matter of 2.5 diameters, micrometers in diameter, it increased the expression of the ACE2 receptor in the lungs, which helps the virus, facilitates the entry of the virus into the lungs, and to cause lung damage. Nitric oxide constitutes a second hit that further damages the lung and that can cause acute respiratory distress syndrome, causing severe disease and death. Apart from this, air pollution has been shown to affect mental health and cognitive ability, especially in children, and it has been linked the high particulate matter air pollution to 150,000 cases of type 2 diabetes in the United States, mainly by causing oxidative stress in the lung, and which in turn triggers increased vascular resistance to insulin, which is the main determinant for the development of type 2 diabetes. Of course, climate change and wildfires can affect the pregnant women, as we previously mentioned. The main problem here that births are accelerated by 5% on hot days when temperature exceeds 32.2 degrees Celsius. And we can have premature births, which we know that they can be detrimental to a child's physical and mental health. So apart from pregnant women, populations at risk are the poor and the homeless, the elderly, the babies and the children, patients diagnosed with cardiac, respiratory or mental disease, and people working outdoors like the farmers. What we also observed this summer was an exacerbation of the urban heat island effect, which is a phenomenon in which the temperature in the center of a city is higher than that of the suburbs and the surrounding rural area. And it is observed mainly after sunset when there are no strong winds. Why? Because due to the high temperatures, which are further exacerbated by the wildfires, increase the heat absorption and retention from the city buildings. And we have also decreased evaporation from the scarcity of the greenery. Apart from this, we know that these climate conditions that we have during wildfires can affect body thermoregulation. How? By disturbing the thermal balance equation that, as you can see here, is that heat production should equal the heat loss. This happens due to the disturbance of the body heat loss mechanisms. Here you can see those mechanisms: conduction, convection, radiation, evaporation, and respiration. And thus, we have the emergence of climate-sensitive diseases like deterioration of kidney function. Here you can see the chronic kidney disease of unknown etiology, or the Mesoamerican nephropathy, as it is also known, which was first described in El Salvador in the 1990s, when an unusually large number of farmers died of irreversible kidney failure. We saw in Athens, after the wildfires, patients coming to the emergency department with the deteriorated kidney function, dehydrated. You can imagine how hot were the temperature with the wildfires during the heat wave. And you can also imagine that we also had power shortages. People lost access to air conditioning. So those with those vulnerable already were very easily dehydrated.
Dr. Geladari, we'll need to wrap up in about 1 minute. Thank you so much.
Okay, sorry. Let me mention also that the collapse of natural ecosystems makes it necessary for animals to move from the land and sea to colder areas to survive. So the risk of exposure to new infectious diseases increases. Animals come into contact with other animals that they would not normally encounter. And thus we have the perfect conditions for the introduction of new pathogens into hosts that then infect humans. This was the case also for COVID-19, which is also a zoonosis. We have, after wildfires, the emergence of eco-anxiety, which constitute feelings of anxiety about the degradation of our ecosystem. We all remember those school strikes that started back in 2015 and are ongoing all over the world. The sleep was disturbed due to the high temperature observed during the nights. There are studies like this American one that supports sleep disturbance, especially during the summer, and this is especially prominent among those with an average annual income of less than $50,000 and the elderly. What we also need to mention here is that during wildfires, patients can lose access to their medication, especially diabetics lose access to their insulin and sugar meters. And we see the emergence of a new field, the geoenvironmental diabetology. And this is very, very important because diabetics constitute a large number of the population. We need research data to support this. And I think I'm done. I was okay with the time.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll move on to Dr. Nadim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will take off here where everybody else has left, and I'll try to be quick. Okay. I will not go over. Dr. Sahin did a good job contextualizing things for us, and I will just cover a couple of points that were mentioned in the working group 1 of the 6th assessment report produced by the IPCC. I want to point out a couple of issues. Between 1850 and 1900, and now the current period we are in, the Earth has warmed up by about 1.1 degrees Celsius. And that's a lot. And we're anticipating much more rapid warming if we keep doing things as we are. And the consequences are extremely dire. An important point that I want to mention here as well is that changes in the land biosphere since 1970 are very much consistent with the warming that we've been experiencing. And this has been manifested in the movement polewards of climate zones in both the northern and the southern hemispheres. And it has also extended the growing season. Not necessarily a good thing. Not necessarily a good thing. What is mentioned also that is important to keep in mind is that the extreme events, heat waves, have been increasing and becoming more severe, whereas the cold waves have been contracting and the severity is less. Intensity and frequency of heavy precipitation have both increased since the 50s, and most likely it's our doing. And with this, I want to move on to certain current concerns. And since I am not a physician by any stretch, my background actually started with agriculture. So I want to highlight a couple of things ending up with agriculture. Our part of the world has very poor adaptive capacity, as is manifested here. The darker the brown, the more, the poorer our adaptive capacity is. So throughout the region, keep this in mind, we cannot adapt readily and quickly. Current concern is that there is also another health issue which we have not talked about. And this is in a direct way leading to those forest fires that we have talked about. The other health issue is the proliferation of diseases, not only in humans as we saw, but it affects animals in a very similar manner to humans, and also in plants and crops. I want to give you a very quick overview of what happened in certain forests in Lebanon and the Mediterranean. This work is taken from Dr. Nabil Nimr. He's a colleague of ours. He teaches at the Université Saint-Esprit Kaslik, ISEC, here in Lebanon. And he's also a visiting professor at the American University of Beirut. He's one of the leading entomologists in the region. So before I start, climate affects not only the trees and everything around the trees. It also affects the insects, and the synchronicity that adjusts both life cycles gets affected, whether through the reduction of habitat or the increasing of predation. This becomes problematic. The most common or the most striking disease is the Cephalacia tenurinensis. It was discovered in Lebanon, but is found throughout the cedars forests in the Mediterranean, in Turkey, Morocco specifically. This bug, this insect, feeds on new growth, and as you can see in this image, it kills new growth and gives this rust appearance to forests. The main culprit is this little insect here that grows after snow cover and produces its larvae that hatch in the soil. And this insect is very much affected by the climate, either through increased moisture in soil, as we can see here. The moisture level in the soil affects this. The temperature affects it. So the warmer that the temperature is in the environment it's growing, the more larvae survive and the more of this insect are produced. Another insect that is common and yet viciously dangerous to pine trees is the pine processionary moth. It is directly linked to a dieback in forests in Lebanon and the Mediterranean in pine forests, as we can see here. And this has been terrible and is associated with the warming in our pattern here. Mild winters reduce mortality, which increase the presence of this moth that causes the greater growth, faster development of the moth, and the damage is much larger. And this is due also to, again here, the lack of synchronization between the moth's development and natural enemies. And another alarming feature is that this moth used to be strictly limited to altitudes below 1,500 meters above sea level. Now they're moving further upwards. They are directly linked to climate change, which is leading to these fluctuations. This is an image of the dieback that we had witnessed. Another problem is with the pine beetle. These beetles burrow into the bark, into the tree, and kill trees rapidly. And they are directly affected by warm weather. The warmer the weather, the less snow we have, the greater their damage is. This is just a quick overview. What happens with these forests is as they die back and we have dry branches, dry trees that are dead, they become, the forests become tinderboxes to increasing weather and to increasing temperatures, and the dryness that is associated with climate change. Precipitation is expected to be reduced by 20% in the Mediterranean, and this coupled with the increase in temperature and the proliferation of death of forests, this allows us to have a tinderbox that at any spark, and most forests in the Mediterranean are human generated by accident or through arson. This then allows for rapid spreading of forest fires, and with our inability to cope with things as they stand now, these forests have become much more devastating. What are my at least concerns, and these are derived from other people's work as well. Working Group 2's chapter, which is forthcoming in February, says that the Mediterranean region is highly vulnerable to interconnected climate risks. Drought, for example, drought followed by forest, followed by floods, as we have seen in Turkey. Forest fires have come in, and after that, the devastation to the land becomes so bad that if And when floods do come, the erosion, the damage to the soil and to the landscape is irreversible. It is important to note that 71% of the MENA region's GDP and 61% of its population are exposed to high or very high water stress. The rising sea level is a problem in the Mediterranean, not by the rise itself, though that could be problematic, but by the storm surges that are coupled with it, and increase the exponential increase in the size of the wave for every few centimeters increase in sea level rise. Multi-hazards threats are another. It's a combination of climatic events, extremes, and pandemics, as we saw with the forest fires throughout the Mediterranean. COVID was there. People were afraid to congregate, but yet had to, and this led to the proliferation of the disease and health hazard, and the inability of the health system in many countries to cope with this increase was further tasked. So disease proliferation, humans and crops are important issues, and the cascading of events is something that we really need to address and keep in mind. I think I will stop here and turn it back over to you, Cecilia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all our speakers for all this incredible knowledge and information that you've shared with us. We have some great questions from our audience. So I'd like to start with a question from Jamal Abu Ashur. He says, due to climate change in the Eastern Mediterranean region, water resources will be greatly reduced, and we will be forced to use water of less quality. And he would like you to comment on, the impact that this has on the region as compared to other climate impacts, which we've talked about in terms of heat and wildfires.
I can jump in on this if I can. Yes, water quality is an issue, has always been an issue in this part of the world. It's not only that we are using poor quality water in irrigation. Sometimes in some countries, raw sewage is used. And this is going to get worse and worse as water availability becomes, or access to water becomes more restrictive. This is an issue, but it is much more manageable than what we have seen in the progression of diseases in animals, progression of diseases in forests. I'm talking about that level, at that level in an agro ecosystem. And then when we move to humans, that's even worse. So the diseases have always been there associated with water quality. They will get more, but the compounding of all of these together is really will tax all systems that we have. Plus, we always keep forgetting, and we've put it to the side, demographics is an issue. We should really work on this part of the world on reducing population growth. This is critical. We cannot afford to keep doing this. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ümit, you were shaking your head. Do you have anything to add?
No, I agree.
Okay, fantastic. Another question here is, there are, the question is, if you could share if there are any policies addressing the effects of heat in populations, especially in urban areas where there's high rates of mental illness as well as homelessness. This is an increasing issue in US cities. And we're curious if there's any policies in any of the countries where you're from to sort of address the impact of heat in urban areas.
Let me get in, but I think you also asked another question about the public health measures to be taken about heat waves, and this is related to this question. For Turkey, I may say that unfortunately, this issue is not really recognized as one of the most manifest impacts of climate change. I still try to understand the reason of this. We are trying to convince policymakers about the importance of this. There can be several reasons. Maybe a very big, massive heat wave, deadly heat wave event never happened in Turkey so far, like the one in Europe in 2003, for example. This could be one of the reasons. I can say that because we saw this summer that people realized that mega fires could happen in Turkey too. So unfortunately, people want to see the disaster in their own eyes. It's unfortunate. They don't really look at the scientific data too much. They want to see it, and it creates a lot of delay for the policy making. Unfortunately, both for the local governments and for the health authorities, the health heat waves are not really recognize the most important impact of climate change. Still, even the public health professionals in Turkey still think that vector-borne diseases, for example, are more important, but I don't think so. I think the most direct and immediate effect will be and still being the impacts of heat waves and mortality due to heat waves. But unfortunately, we have, and also maybe there is a cultural reason, because in the countries like Turkey, warm weather is good always. You know, you like warm weather, you like sun, and you think that cold is more deadly than hot, but it's actually it's being opposite now because of climate change. Now hot weather is more deadly than cold weather in country like Turkey, in the Mediterranean countries probably. So, but we still have a lot of way to go in this matter.
Okay, thank you so much. This is a question for Dr. Geladari. Haley Campbell's asking if you could elaborate on how the summer of 2021 wildfires in Greece impacted the existing healthcare infrastructure, and what the results were of that.
Yes, of course. For example, during the wildfires that we had in summer, patients lost access to medical health care, either due to catastrophes that occurred in the roads. They couldn't reach to the hospital, patients couldn't reach to the hospital, and also some medical centers were also destroyed from the wildfires. Another indirect effect is that we had many people visiting the emergency departments with respiratory or heart problems. So this increased the burdens for the physicians there in the emergency departments, because they had to cope with the increased cases of COVID-19, the confirmed cases of COVID-19, and they also had to deal with patients coming from these areas. So you can imagine that the burden for the physicians, the population that wanted to go to the hospital and get examined was very high.
Thank you so much for that. And I know we saw similar impacts in the US after, we've seen huge heat waves and huge wildfires, and seen how much healthcare systems are impacted by inundations by patients who need help. And we've seen lack of capacity be one of the issues resulting from that. The next question is from Stefan Wheat. And the question is around what public health infrastructure currently exists for health warning systems in the region, for example, for heat warning systems, for air quality warning systems. What exists right now, and what needs to be built in order to keep populations safe?
In Greece.
Sure, yeah, Greece, Turkey, Lebanon.
For example, in Greece, we have the Civil Protection Department that informs people in case we are expecting a heat wave, or in case we have a wildfire. The send a message to our mobile phones that informs us about the situation and provides us with measures that we need to take. For example, when we have a wildfire, they text us and not to open the windows, to evacuate a city to the closest area. Our Prime Minister, as I mentioned, established the new Ministry of Climate Change and Civil Protection, which will help further raise public awareness. And we have also a department in the Ministry of Environment and Energy that has data about the air quality index in several regions around Greece, not only in Attica. And that from there we can extract data, research data.
Let me add something. I was just trying to say this actually. Unfortunately, we don't have this system yet. So that's very important. Still for the heat waves and also air pollution. For heat waves, still only meteorological services publishing a warning, and that's all. Not the health authorities, not the local governments, not the government itself. They don't send any messages, they don't do any announcements, etc., etc. This is what I was trying to say, that this is not still recognized as a public health crisis. Also for air quality, when there was an air quality, the big smoke, for example, and an air quality crisis, air pollution crisis, only environmental ministry is publishing that this is happening, and that's all. And there's no any real I don't know, precaution to be published or any warning system. So I think still for Turkey, we still have a lot of way to go, unfortunately.
In Lebanon, we only have this early warning system for forest fires that has been developed at the university here, the Balamand University, and adopted by the government in a variation of it. But it is sort of a state of the art, and it is housed at the Disaster Risk Management Unit at the Prime Minister's office. Unfortunately, we don't have an air quality warning system. We rely just on whatever, if those that have access to the internet and are interested, they can go to the WHO websites or similar websites to look at the air quality. But that's not something that's common. And heat waves here are you know, they're not something unusual so far. It's hot. In July, August are hot. You go to the beach, you go to the mountains, and you cool off. And that's what people think. But the more people are stuck in the cities, it is getting hotter and hotter. And the heat island effect, I was just showing some data earlier today, where we could see in smaller cities and out in areas that do not have this urban buildup, the maximum temperature in Lebanon has not changed over the past 50, 60 years. But in Beirut, it has increased by a degree or a degree and a half over 110 years or so. And this, compared to the minimum temperature, which has been increasing throughout Lebanon, this tells us that the urban heat island effect in Beirut, which is very densely populated, very highly built up, is causing more and more grief. And we can see this nowadays because because of the crises that we're going through. Electricity is not available many an hour a day, and we don't have ACs, so we're suffocating in the cities. So those that are living up in the mountains are much better off. This is one aspect that we need to work on.
Thank you all so much. With the COP26 coming up, there's been a push sort of globally to include HNAPs, or Health National Adaptation Plans, as a component of the national adaptation plans for countries. I'm wondering if you could comment, if you know, on the status of health adaptation plans for your country, and if that is even on the radar or on the agenda of policymakers.
We have done a study on the cost of climate change on Lebanon's basic economy, and the cost is now, if we do nothing for the next by 2050, I think, or 2040, the cost is about $80 billion a year. And part of that is based on health. So the health component, the health impact of climate change is well recognized. And now how well are we reacting to this information and to this study that was done? I don't know. It's still part. What we are focusing on is whatever money is made available by the different funds that that are made available through the UNFCCC and through donors, and these are not really focused on the health aspect. Most of the funding that comes in addresses mitigation because it's a backdoor into supporting donor economies. So rather than focusing on adaptation and helping the health sector adapt early on to what's coming, we are being thrown back into mitigation where most of the money is going. And this has improved a little bit, but still the major focus is on mitigation, which is not helping at all. Over.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you all being here today. We've learned a ton. We're at the top of the hour. So if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and I can direct them on to our speakers. We are honored to have you join us today, and we will be posting this video in the next 24 hours for those of you who would like to share this with your colleagues. Again, thank you so much for being here today, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.